Following a historic day at the Capitol on January 6th, Americans are processing surreal images from the riot. Reactions vary from passionate support of the rioters to theories of Antifa infiltration of the protests to full-throated condemnation and disgust and demands for revenge. Many members of Congress expressed shock that the doors of the Capitol, such a hallowed symbol of the American Republic, would be breached by an angry mob. The institutional media apparently shares this disbelief and is largely unable or unwilling to explore the possibilities of why this happened. Many of them, too, are calling for revenge. To understand the context of January 6th, we must ask ourselves what led up to these events, how did they unfold, and also what follows next. The events leading up to the assault on the Capitol building did not start with Trump, his inauguration, or his bid for re-election. What happened yesterday was a low, decades-long simmer that suddenly bubbled to a boil. Historic context is necessary, but difficult to express in a short period of time, but I'll try to be concise. So as most of us know, but some try to forget, America was largely founded on Christian religious values, intertwined with European culture. This nation emerged through events not very much unlike what happened on the Capitol on the 6th. Men immersed in the scriptures of the Bible, Greek and Roman philosophy, and the writings of John Locke and Thomas Paine demanded an independent land free from the burdensome bureaucracy of the British Empire and a British Parliament which was violating English law in America. What followed was the birth of an imperfect nation that nonetheless brought tremendous freedom and prosperity to its citizens. Americans were largely able to keep and increase their property, express their opinions freely, worship as they saw fit, and instruct their children according to the laws of God and nature. At the turn of the 19th century, intellectuals and academics in Europe began formulating political ideologies based largely on the grievances of the working class. Communism erupted onto the global political scene. By the mid-20th century, tens of millions were dead from violence and starvation. While unable to gain control through overt revolution in the United States, communism instead paused and chose to infiltrate the very institutions that kept America alive, namely academia, government, and the churches. While many Americans could perceive what was happening over the years, or at least had an uneasy feeling about what was going on, Conservatism Inc. was largely clueless. While the cancer of Marxism spread throughout the organs of America, conservative thought leaders seemed more obsessed with tax rates, creating small businesses, and bombing various Muslim tribesmen in Asia. For decades, neoconservatives hyperventilated about external threats, all while the true seeds of our destruction germinated and spread their roots throughout the nation's foundations. Many Americans who either saw this clearly or felt this nagging feeling that things were going down a very dark path became desperate for leadership. In 2016, Donald Trump rode this wave of discontent to the presidency. While not a fiscal conservative, President Trump and his supporters provided the most vigorous attack on the corporate, media, academic, and government complex to date. For better or for worse, Trump used tactics favored by the left. Trump's targeted personal attacks and deft wielding of the media for his own political advantage was unlike anything seen by a Republican president. Those on the right, including some who didn't vote for Trump in 2016, respected him for it and became very loyal to him. The media elite, unable to withstand this reversal in tactics, became unhinged. For months, conservatives were bombarded with the lies of Russiagate, followed by months of rioting and arson at the hands of Antifa and Black Lives Matter. Almost simultaneously came COVID-19. COVID restrictions destroyed the finances of millions of Americans. In late 2020, Americans were told to check our privilege, kneel, recant, wear a mask, and stay at your homes. That is, unless you are intent on tearing down businesses and doing the dirty work of the elite. Then came Election Day. It became immediately apparent that the media and government was unable and unwilling to look at the allegations. The courts did not entertain challenges to the electoral outcome despite obvious incidents of error, corruption, or fraud. Election victories by Democrats in Georgia on January 5th led to Democratic control of the House, Senate, and the presidency. Democrats promised to accelerate plans for implementing socialist policy in the United States. Americans who once saw hope in President Trump and a new breed of conservative populism were now confronted by what they saw as a Democratic-run government enabled by corrupted corporations and media. I believe deep down for many Americans, the 2020 presidential election was not about Donald Trump, but about two different views for America. On one side was a hope for a renewed American tradition, one including private property rights, right to self-defense, freedom of expression, and traditional religious and cultural values. A system based off Christian beliefs in love for your neighbor, respect, and justice. On the other was the completion of the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s. This included egalitarianism, socialist economic policy, controlled political speech, government interventionism, and the promotion of gender and racial re-education. For either side, the stakes were high, but for the right, it was especially so. It was apparent that decades of advances by the left were nearing the point of no return. Conservatives realized that in a few short years, demographic and cultural changes would signify the end of America as we knew it. And perhaps a few realized that if America traveled the dark path of Marxism, there would be few refuges for liberty in an increasingly connected and globalized world. The events of January 6th at the United States Capitol were surreal. Scenes of rioters breaking into the Capitol building shocked the senses. The rage seemed spontaneous. In the aftermath, many are now grasping with the nature of what happened. Unfortunately, many on both the right and the left are drawing wrong conclusions. This is dangerous in that it leads to false assumptions by those in positions of national leadership, threatening to cause increasingly worse conflict in the months ahead. In a short-term move fraught with long-term consequences, many Republicans dropped their objections to the election results. Many Americans at home watched in disbelief as representatives congratulated themselves and each other while vowing to never let such a scene happen again. By not doing their duty to protect election integrity, our leaders have almost ensured that things will only get worse from here. Some in the right are oddly blaming such violence in Antifa. I find this puzzling. The raid on the Capitol building almost certainly led by mostly Trump supporters, though of what caliber can be debated. While it is true Antifa and other left-wing groups have been more aggressive when it comes to organized violence, and there may have been some agitators present, it is dismissive of both American history and tradition to say that the right is incapable of violence. We have, in fact, written songs, built statues, and read books about righteous but violent men. If countless Trump supporters were calling the election a sham, as they were on Twitter and Parler, if they said the institutions of government are corrupted from top to bottom, and if many were predicting civil war if Democrats capture the Senate, should we have been surprised by what happened? What, shall we ask, would the Founding Fathers in all of their enlightenment have done? They may not have invaded the Capitol building, but their proposals and political speeches may have seemed pretty edgy by today's standards. And this is where the left gets it dangerously wrong. The riots weren't caused by President Trump. They were a symptom of the decades-long unrest building among many quiet and mostly law-abiding conservatives. To dismiss this reality and suggest the right will always be polite and docile in the face of a full-blown cultural revolution will only ensure future conflict. One word that keeps popping up in conversation lately is the word secession. The impulse to keep the country together is noble, but if improperly executed, it can instead accelerate its demise. Already, charges of treason and insurrection are being proposed for those who are directly or indirectly responsible for the events of January the 6th. Meanwhile, the mainline press continues in its explanation provided by the corporate socialists. They seem to think that they can report on the events of January 6th outside the context of the events of the last 6 months, where rioting, widespread looting, arson, and assaults were commonplace across the United States. The media, in its self-righteousness, believes this hypocrisy perhaps will go unnoticed. It believes it can work with the powers that be, i.e. Congress, to leverage enough cultural pressure to keep conservatives in line. Conservatives see the truth in all of this plain as day. The hypocrisy is not lost on them. The elite's efforts will only harden the resolve of the right. And with the advent of alternative media and new social media platforms, one key pillar of corporate socialism is being eroded. More than ever, like-minded conservatives will be able to communicate directly with each other, rather than through the filter of corporate-controlled media. In short, the media will no longer be able to control Americans in the way that they had in the past. Mass delusion with our system will follow, and new centers of influence and power will form. The likely scenario that will occur is that more Americans will begin to direct their attention towards their local communities. If they can't win by the rules at the national level, they will seek to carve out places on their own. Already, secessionist movements are on the rise. Local militias are popping up throughout the country, both on the left and the right. Millions of Americans are purchasing firearms and seeking to be more self-reliant. Nullification efforts are likely to accelerate, bringing with them the prospect of counties defying state governments and state governments defying the federal government. Americans are looking at their children and are frightened at what kind of future they may have. A crisis of governmental legitimacy is sure to follow, but there is a way out of this mess, and it is woefully absent from the conversation in the media and on Capitol Hill. The bottom line is our society must become more decentralized and the integrity of elections restored. Individuals, counties, and states must be freed to the greatest extent possible from the federal, centralized bureaucracy. Matters of policy and regulation should be made at the lowest level, where Americans feel like they have better access to those impacting their lives. We must ensure sufficient accountability in the election process while making the institutions of the presidency and Congress as irrelevant as possible. Barring a mass political conversion or admission of defeat by one side, this is the only way to allow for peace in these precariously United States. Once we get back to letting red states be red and blue states be blue, only then can we work on the business of being Americans once again. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video beneficial to you. I would appreciate any comments or criticisms you may be able to leave in the comment section below.